Hello, and welcome back to Post Traumatic Revelations. I am your host, Afrah Caraballo, and in today's episode, we are looking at the idea of safety in suffering and danger of healing. I know, I can almost feel your judgment coming through the airwaves. Why would anyone want to suffer? Why would anyone want to be miserable? Why would anyone choose prison or slavery or an abusive relationship? And that is exactly the kind of judgment that has motivated me to do this podcast. I've said it before, and I believe it's true. Judgment, guilt, and shame are the barriers to all healing. Whether we're judging ourselves, whether we're judging someone else, or whether we're being judged. Judgment creates distance, and that distance leads to disconnection, and that disconnection creates discomfort, be it sadness, anger, frustration, fear, anxiety. We're all social beings, and we have this physiological need to be connected to another human being, be it family, friends, coworkers, classmates, sports team members, connected to our village, connected to our home, or connected in the bedroom. We have a primal need to belong. So the feeling of being judged can affect us on a very cellular level, whether that's conscious or not. When we feel judged, there's this distance, there's this disconnect, and there's this discomfort. And this can happen in the best of relationships, in the best of times, even in a loving and supportive relationship. We're seeking approval, we're seeking reassurance, and we're asking questions of our family, of our friends. How do I look? How do I sound? Does this make me look skinny? Does this make me look fat? Does this make me look good? Does this make me look more desirable or repulsive? So, even in relationships where we feel relatively safe, we're still taking special care to ensure we stay connected in those relationships. We want to stay close and supported, whether that's in our personal relationships, our professional relationships, our social engagements. We're constantly monitoring our standing, worrying about how we look. Do we look smart? Are we funny? Are we athletic enough? Are we rich enough? Are we too poor? Are we in style? Are we wearing the right clothes? Are we listening to the right music? There's this constant monitoring. And essentially, what we're doing is trying to make sure that we belong, that we fit in, that we're not too different or isolated. So, what we really want to know is, are we good enough to be safe? Are we accepted? Are we wanted? Which brings us back to the topic at hand. It is so scary and so uncomfortable that we don't want to change too much, so that many of us will even endure abusive relationships. We will endure a certain amount of suffering just to feel safe. need to belong is so strong that we will tolerate unspeakable treatment if we're unaware of a safer alternative. So if you are convinced that no one else will treat you better than your current owner, warden, partner, boss, or friend, if you're convinced that this is as good as it gets, then leaving, escaping seems dangerous and not worth the effort. You will tolerate their verbal abuse, their physical abuse, their emotional and psychological abuse. So many victims accept abuse and neglect as a natural part of a relationship and often will take responsibility for the behaviors of the abuser, saying things like, I made her do it, or I made him do it, and if I didn't do this or that, they wouldn't have lost their temper. If I didn't make them mad, or if I just ironed the shirt right, or if I had just come right home after work, she wouldn't have cheated on me, or she wouldn't have left me, or if I had just answered the phone in time, they wouldn't have cheated on me. If I didn't come home late, or if I didn't come to work late, or my boss wouldn't have yelled at me and embarrassed me, or if I didn't talk back, if I didn't question so much, my parents wouldn't have beaten me, or the list goes on and on. The point is, we tolerate pain and suffering to feel safe, to belong, to not risk the dangers of what may or may not be a better situation. And because we've done horrible, horrible things in the history of humankind, right? Around World War II era, horrible, treacherous, unspeakable acts were performed on human beings. And we now know that simply being in the presence of another person can increase the torture that a person can tolerate. So that even being in a relationship with someone you hate feels better than being alone. Many victims feel like prison, slavery, or domestic violence relationships are safer than being alone. And for people who cannot see or even imagine freedom, can't even imagine healing, can't even imagine better conditions, there is safety in that suffering. So often I hear the monster you know is better than the monster you don't know. That there's not even the consideration that there is no other monster. I hear comments like, at least I get food. At least I know where I'm going to sleep tonight. At least I have a safe place to sleep. At least I'm not being beaten every day. I could die if I leave. Nothing could be much better. The risk of what's out there isn't worth it. That staying here, at least I know what I have because no one would ever love me. No one could love somebody like me. No one could accept someone like me. I'm too dumb. I'm too stupid. I'm too damaged. Or there's the cases where we're protecting the abuser, defending the abuser. They don't really mean what they're saying. They don't mean to lose their temper. They're not this mean all the time. Or they apologized. They replaced my phone or they replaced my shirt, or they got me a new car, or they aren't always like this. They're actually really nice and sweet sometimes. And that's probably true. Most offenders are also trauma victims who feel like intimidation and control is the only way to have a relationship. And that is a podcast all its own. This is about looking at how being in pain and suffering feels safer than moving toward healing. But in order to heal, you have to actively look at the damage, consciously look at the wound, look at the trauma. Safety in the suffering is about survival. It involves a level of disconnect, right? That trauma breaks our sense of safety, it breaks our sense of self. And when we find ourselves in relationship that allows us to survive, we start to make concessions, right? That at least becomes enough. But before you can heal, you must actually give yourself permission to stop. Stop running, stop hiding, stop denying, stop delaying, stop defending and avoiding, and actually assess the damage. How bad is the trauma? Where's the bleeding coming from? What's the extent of the damage? And then start addressing it. But first, you must give yourself permission to even think about it. So many victims are so traumatized. They're too traumatized to even think or imagine healing because for them, it's just too dangerous. Permission to heal can be risky. For many, the danger of healing is very real. And studies show that the first 72 hours are the most dangerous for an escaping victim. But even before attempting that escape, we must give ourselves permission to think, to imagine, to try, permission to stop, assess, and address. Post traumatic healing starts with a thought. Freedom starts with a thought. And with that change of awareness, change in consciousness, healing starts with remembering who you really are, who you are beyond your body, who you are beyond your weight, beyond your gender, beyond your economic status, who you are beyond your title, who you are beyond the labels. Post traumatic healing starts when you give yourself permission to remember who you were before you learned about judgment, guilt, shame, before you assumed the roles of the pretty one, the smart one, the middle child, the first child, the baby, the ugly one, the dumb one, the athletic one, the jock, the dancer. Before you attached these labels, before you assumed these labels placed on you by broken and traumatized people in your life, who you were before you were traumatized, before your sense of self, your sense of safety was broken or stolen. There's a part of us that lives beyond the suffering, beyond the danger. Safety in the suffering is a state of mind. Danger in the suffering is a state of mind. Life sentence in prison is a state of mind. Death in a concentration camp is also a state of mind. Freedom in institutional slavery is a state of mind. And all of them can feel very real, very scary, and very painful. So I'm not asking you to play pretend. I'm not asking you to live in denial. I'm asking you to remember who you really are. This is an invitation for you to know that, like Nelson Mandela, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Viktor Frankl, Gandhi, I'm asking you to remember and know that you are so much more than your current situation. For better or worse, you're so much more than a promotion and you're so much more than the firing, right? You're so much more than your current physical state. And like these survivors who not only survived but thrived and became teachers and healers in their own right, when you change your mind about what's possible, when you change your mind and remember who you are, when you give yourself permission to think differently, to imagine differently, you start to change, right? Freedom starts with a thought. And on a cellular level, when you change your mind, your body starts to change. On a chemical level, your adrenaline and cortisol change, your mind change, your immune system change. And with these changes in thinking, these changes in being, comes a change in the way you see things. And so you start to see and attract opportunities that you hadn't noticed before. You start to attract help and support that you had not noticed before. Now, permission is about allowing, right? Permission is about opening up to new possibility, not judging. Judging is restrictive, right? Judge is a wall and it feeds the guilt and shame. And so that's restrictive. So if you're giving yourself permission to think about freedom, permission to think about healing, you're actually opening up your mind, your thoughts, your imagination to new possibility, not dragging along the judgment, guilt, and shame, judging your old behaviors and feeling guilty and ashamed. So tempting. It's so tempting for us to say, why didn't I do this sooner? How could I have been so stupid? How could I have been so weak? How could I have been so pathetic? All of that, that's distraction. Healing is about focusing on where you want to go, right? That we don't let the judgment and the guilt and the shame create new walls, new stumbling blocks. That with that permission, we actually notice with non judgment. We notice with compassion that safety in the suffering was a coping strategy. We were in survival of that situation, right? And from that point of view, if you're thinking that only just endure the suffering, it'll get better, just endure the suffering, it'll get better. From that point of view, freedom and healing does feel very dangerous. It looks very dangerous. Moving toward that, imagining that, brings its own anxiety. So, permission is about non judgmental shift. It's a non judgmental shift in awareness and thinking and consciousness. As we give ourselves permission to heal, it allows us to stop, assess, and address. And addressing is about noticing all the choices we made without judging them. We notice the choices we made, the behaviors. We notice the wounds without judging them. Safety in the suffering and danger in the healing is as real as you believe it is. And caution should be taken when you're moving toward your version of healing. You should move on your terms, at your pace. And in that is the freedom, right? Permission to move toward freedom starts with a thought and planning and then taking action. And when we can do this in a non judgmental way, our chemistry shifts, our energy shifts, and we start attracting the support, the information. We can see clearer, we can think clearer, right? When you have that internal resolve, opportunities appear. And so, once again, I want to thank you. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your permission. And I wish you love, hope, and healing. And until next time, be well.